Efficiency isn't the god.
No.
And I think people are realizing, even as you mentioned, your friends who are done with this view in a way, they're looking for some sort of divinity. And obviously it's not found in Amazon warehouses with the best use of space every square foot, right? Because you still go to Italy and you go to the piazza, and some guy who owns the real estate conglomerate in America goes there, and maybe they get a moment where they look and they go, what a waste of real estate. You can shove how many tents, to pay $300 a tent to be on here on Sunday. And you go, no, that's not the purpose of the piazza.
Hello, and welcome to Why Are We Talking About Rabbits? That's the podcast brought to you by First Things Foundation. I'm doing my English accent because the Queen has died. But there's no other reason to do it whatsoever. We are not related to English things at www.first-things.org. We are related in no way except for as human beings sharing humanity. I want to say hi to everybody out there. This is a podcast using philosophy, history, theology, and deeply immersive experiences to figure out what's going on. What's going on today is, in addition to having a new editor doing even more work for us. Hi, Jeremy. Everybody say hi to Jeremy. Jeremy, say hi in your way. Say hi in your way that an editor would say behind the lens, who's not in the room with me. Hi, Jeremy. Today is JimBob. JimBob comes on. He's famous for MadebyJimBob. He's a philosopher. He is a YouTube personality, an artist, and he creates memes that are hilarious. And I hope that my good friend and editor Jeremy will cut some of them in because they are good. And you're allowed to. JimBob told me you could. This is WAWTAR. This is a day in September 2022, and this is JimBob talking about old world, new world, deep divides that he sees from his perch as an artist in Colorado. On WAWTAR. JimBob, thanks for coming and talking to us.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
How would you define yourself? Artist?
I would call myself a satirist, satire, meme lord.
I'm already happy. Guys, you got to go check out JimBob. First of all, if you're a satirist, that's cool. That works. As a satirist, were you responsible for Sally, Suffering Sally?
Yes, I also am an animator as well. Yeah.
Will you guys go check out this? So more of Suffering Sally's coming, am I right?
Yes.
She's just getting started.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
Tell us about Suffering Sally and the kind of satirism that you do.
Okay. I guess this kind of satire I've always done since the beginning. The beginning was somewhere around 2016. Was started with just basic 1 single frame to 3 frame comics, right? And that expanded, and I built a pretty big audience from that alone. And then I started learning animation, and I realized that all of these concepts and ideas, which are mostly philosophically based or culturally based, where I'm actually shedding light on the absurdity of culture, trends, worldviews, and such. And so when I learned animation, I realized, well, this is an obvious next step to include sound, music, dialogue, all of it, right? To pretty much take my comics and make them move. And so I dabbled in different versions of that. I had like a little series based on Jordan Peterson for a little bit, and I realized it didn't have enough legs. It didn't get the scope. That's a particular in culture. That's not culture. That's a one particular aspect. And so Suffering Sally who is this blue-haired sort of NPC, ambiguous, androgynous being, represents to me really the embodiment of absurdity, of upside down world. And the term itself is it describes that these kinds of people actually, I believe, suffer, but we also suffer them. We're suffering them too. So it cuts two ways, and really just to bring it to light and make fun of it, right? Some of it is based on some low hanging fruit targets like the NPC blue haired commie socialists, the ones maybe Ben Shapiro focuses on too much. But I also want to include in that world all the variety of things that I always end up talking about through my comics and live streams as well. So I just see it as an opportunity to use talents, not just my own, people who are really good at voices and concepts and music. My following is really creative. They're not just consumers. They're super creative, talented people. And so I want to, Severing Sally is also an opportunity to harness those gifts.
So watching you do that to get ready to talk to you, realizing that there's like a base to your movement. There's a base to your art. By that, I mean, there's this deep bass voice that's coming. There's Bertaria. There's sort of, I don't want to say disgruntled, because I'm disgruntled. I mean, we're all sort of disgruntled. But to put it in the context of WAWTAR, what we do, you're sort of trying to reach back into the old world, this pre-enlightenment world, and sort of call upon something like what I would just call sanity. But I think a lot of New Worlders, deeply dedicated scientific minds, what is it, left brainers or right brainers? I always forget. With the other brain, not art, whatever brain that is. Those cats, I don't know, have built a world where they're not funny about not being able to prove stuff. In other words, proof is sort of the way by which they make sense of the world. And I hear you as saying there's like a deeper proof, and you're trying to expose it. Am I wrong? Does that not sound right to you?
Yeah. I'm doing two methods. I'm examining other people's worldviews and paradigms. I think it's a spiritual warfare, which I think you're talking about. Like, it's not just calling to old world, because old world could have been pragmatic but untrue. There could have been a time that didn't have all this nonsense, but it was based in something that you and I maybe don't even agree with, but it was cohesive. That there was this large agreement. It was homogenous. And I think at the surface level, this kind of cultural war that we experience today, the rejection of like progressivism and all this nonsense, there's this impulse to call back to some level of traditionalism, something that's a little more pure and simple in its form. But that impulse doesn't tell us what that is. And I think what I'm doing is examining, well, what is it? I'm actually in the process of pointing to, or trying to use my compass and everything I do to find, well, what is it? It can't just be old world. And then I've examined traditionalism. Well, traditionalism isn't in itself tell us which tradition, right? Because there's a lot of traditions, and so it seems to be like, especially in the right-left dialectic in politics, there's this new form of rejecting all this, and it comes in the form of like the Nick Fuentes kind of generation, and or there's like a sort of a white nationalist version, and then there's this maybe there's the Ben Shapiro version is like, get back to free market capitalism. Like everyone almost tries to assume some demigod, right, in the form of a system, right? There are these anarchists, there are these there's even the Christian ones, which I kind of interact with, but we don't actually all agree on what this is, what we're actually trying to pursue here. And so a lot of what I'm doing now is interlinked with that pursuit. And there's other people under my umbrella of content who are trying to figure that out as well, right? And what is that thing you called?
What are you finding?
Well, I'm leaning toward orthodoxy as far as what's coherently expressed and maintained as a preservation of not just a Christian view, but the traditions tied to it. So I've gotten in a lot of discussions, and some of them are pretty contentious, it's no longer a debate between atheists, right? It's a debate about, well, which tradition, right, do you maintain and do you preserve, right? It's a legitimate question, because there's a paradox in rejecting traditionalism, which is to say, if you come to some truth that isn't people in funny gowns, right, and you're like, it can't be that, that's too old and weird. Whatever you come to as your conclusion, there's this contradiction, because whatever that is, your impulse is to then preserve and share that, which ironically becomes a tradition. So we're all after some system that we can not just point to, but live a certain way. And then what that necessitates is customs, right? Some form of rituals, even. And I don't mean like, Epstein Island rituals. I'm talking about just rituals in the way we interact with each other and what's expected of each other. Then there's hierarchy. It necessitates hierarchy, which the libertarians and the anarchists who follow me don't like that either. But I don't see any way around these things. That the moment you grab something you call a new system we ought to pursue, well, you're basically appealing to some level of morality, metaphysics, ethics, epistemology, and tradition. And I just see that I'm just honest with myself about it, and I try to convey it, at least in my live streams, that none of us are neutral, right? It's a myth to state that we're neutral about our metaphysics and our morality and what we seek to be like ultimacy, right? That we're seeking some level of ultimacy, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that you can share it, so that you can go, see, this is altering. This is, in some circles, it's transformative or something like that. And it's all around us. It's every argument you see, even if a quick TikTok video is sharing some, even if it's minuscule, some smuggled ought claim, maybe, of where we ought to go, right? A telos in philosophy, a teleological priority of purpose. And we as men want, and I would say need it. We need it, we seek it, we want it, because that's the foundation of our family, right? It's not just us as singular men in the individual, in this Ayn Randian world where we just pursue our own wants and desires, and then that's what we teach our children. We seek something bigger than us as men that we can embed ourselves in as a hierarchical peak, let's say, of that thing. So we can go, oh, it's more than us. It's man. It's horizontal too. It's not just vertical. It goes outward to community. And so I think it's also that I'm seeing is it's a masculine. There is a war with women, not between women, like men and women. There's a war that women have to fight, but I believe it's led by men, that they follow men. And that's something also that I'm starting to see in real time, that this war that blurs the distinction between men and women, it is one of the most effective tactics that, let's say, a globalist, empire with no loyalty to nations or traditions will use. And they've done it pretty well. And I think what you're seeing now is the rejection of that. But I don't think everyone is unified on what basis they're rejecting it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It also, you use the word follow. Women follow men. So now you're doing this thing, right? And I understand fundamentally in an iconographic way what you're talking about. The problem is the concept of equality gets inserted in between your word follow there and men and women. And so explain, what role does equality play in this? I think you're describing apophatic. I think you're explaining an apophatic life, a life where you don't define what God is as much as what God is not. And then by definition, you're describing a life led by a human being that's lived in humility, which is like, I don't know that you're wrong. I don't know that you're right, but I know that I'm often wrong. So I'll start there with that. And then I'm not going to engage you in red and blue argument. I'm going to engage you in something like a vulnerable conversation about human life. So With that in mind,
Yeah.
though, how do you fit the equality in? The equality?
I don't insert equality. I don't believe in equality. I believe that nothing is, the only equality in my worldview is that we're all made in the image of God. But that doesn't necessitate that suddenly pragmatically, logistically, how we live is somehow equal. We're not equal in our talents or gifts. We're not equal in our discernment. We're not equal in the sins that we're drawn to. So we're uneven in a lot of ways, and that's just among men, let's say. But then you introduce women, the fundamental roles and what draws us and what impacts us and influences us are fundamentally different between men and women. So this notion of equality, I think, is mostly led by an Enlightenment era paradigm that suggests individuality is the highest value first. And then it assumes that women should be equal to men, but the kind of contradiction there is you have to assume they're not equal fundamentally to then say they should be equal, right? You're basically admitting that they're not. And what it's led to, at least in the form that's that we see today, is this contrived attempt to make women not only equal to men but above men in some ways. The same way a vegan would make an animal not just equal to man, but try to elevate them above man. Oh, they're better. They don't fight wars or whatever, and all this banking or whatever. And but when
they're not good at banking.
Yeah, exactly.
Therefore, they're better.
Yeah,
That's actually.
So
we should talk about that. Actually, no. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Just to finish this one thought is that the women, they're now confused because they've been sold a flawed counterfeit bill of goods that suggests your empowerment should show up in the world as basically impersonating men. So making a woman equal to man just makes a man, like a shitty version of a man. And then if you make man, the man's what they're sold on is different. They're not sold on being equal with women. They're sold on being equal with God. And so that just makes for God. So the man who tries to be a god is just a god, and a woman who tries to be a man is just a shitty version of a man. So you get this like really well orchestrated inversion of what's I believe is intended, which is that there is hierarchy, and to reject it is contradictory because you need to assume a hierarchy to reject something. So it's similar to like the anarchists who are like, we reject rulers. And then you're like, well, that's a rule. And suddenly now you just require a rule, some sort of rulers to govern that new rule of no rulers. It's a contradiction. So
it's the outcome, the natural and only outcome of a total materialistic worldview, in my opinion.
Right. Absolutely. I think that's key. And I try to always circle back to that on every stream I do. And I even talk to fellow Christians about this, that the vulnerability of men, even from, in my view, the Christian view, there's a vulnerability to trying to seek physical material outcomes as the scoreboard. And it's really, there's a little fuzzy line there, because you want to live consistent with your views, which will be expressed out in the world. So if we express our gifts, they'll be out in the world. Like our fruits will be out in the world. What we do and choose not to do, these are things expressed out in the world. But it's not exactly the same as making the scoreboard. And that's to say, well, if we just get everyone to convert to this and we finally get to this place, right? This good place, we'll finally get there. We all have a vulnerability to healing the world, which is a concept that is in, I think I don't know if it's the Talmud. There's a term that's called Tikkun Olam, right? So there's that term, but then you get it in the universalist approach, right? You get it even today in the Catholic Church, this concept of umbrellaing all beliefs under one system, sort of like
this ecumenical
stuff.
Ecumenism,
Perennialism. And so these things, once you see it from that view, like what you just said, you can spot utilitarianism in any given paradigm, right? And including your own, like our own. There's a moment where I go there sometimes. My mind goes to, well, I got to just I got to have this goal in my life to do X, Y, Z, right? And then you realize, well, no, that can't be it, because if you presuppose God, right, in any paradigm, there, unless you say God is equal to matter, like the world, like Mother Nature and the tree and all of it, and the squirrel is God too. But then there's no distinction between you and them. Everyone's just God, right? But if you don't take that approach, all other versions, the moment you try to equate good with actuality, you're in trouble. It's incoherent. But the same applies to evil, right? And so, which is, they have a relationship, because if you equate, what's this? The scripture is the battle of good and evil is not in flesh and blood, right? It's about power and principalities. So it's really, for the most part, a battle with yourself and what your principles are, and whether you can abstain from your fallen nature, right? And then if you do, you understand that you did, right? And there's that's why repentance and all this. But if you don't have that, you can assign evil to people, right? And even feel really right, like Klaus Schwab. We gotta, your notion, your impulse sometimes is like, we got to stop this. We got to take them. We got to do these things, and you realize, okay, these are the same things. If you try to assign evil to physicality, whether it's a person, a group of people, an animal, a tree, then what you're doing simultaneously is assuming that the good can be directly assigned to physicality. Yeah. It's a trap either way. And so some people don't like that, because if they're optimists, it sounds nihilistic, doesn't it? Like if you remove some other part of it, it sounds like, well, what are we supposed to do, Jim Bob?
I'm sure you get that all the time.
I do.
But the problem is if you close the loop, in my humble opinion, if you close the loop, in other words, if the world is in and of itself the world, there's nothing transcendent. Again, the materialistic worldview,
right?
Which we got sold. I got sold in school, man. I grew up on this, like on the teat. If you close the loop, then we are all utopians. We all are ideologues. We are all in a battle to save the closed loop material rock that we're living on. And then it is a battle. I do think it is a battle. But if you open that loop, in other words, if there's something transcendent, if I'm meant for something, I don't want to say not the world, because I'm an Orthodox Christian. So the spirituality is it's intermeshed. It's not like I'm going somewhere on a conveyor belt. You know what I'm saying?
Right. You're in the world, not of the world.
Right. So I'm sharing in the spiritual space. And if that's a real thing, I mean real, not like made up. If there is actually a real thing, then it forces me out of my utopian view and points me toward death, which is a different kind of objection that my friends have with me.
Totally. Yeah, totally. No, I totally agree. I would even argue that when you said the materialist, if you are stuck in the materialist loop that you said, that becomes incoherent, because I've just recently debated a naturalist, and they couldn't quite understand that if you take the naturalist approach, even your statements about the world are just outputs. They're literally just mechanical fart sound. They're no different than a stomach farting. Like it's no different. It can't be, because to make any value claim about an utterance, right, about the world, truth, everything is just material, man. No, the utterance of everything being material, the statement itself is just this perturbation of air mechanically. There's nothing, it can't be anything other than that. That's from a materialist worldview. So I try to get people to reject that loop that you're talking about, because the moment you express any knowledge about that loop, you're already appealing to something outside of the loop, right?
Wow, man, you speak my language. But so I call that, or it's been called, I'm not, believe me, there's nothing new under the sun. But I noticed it working overseas, this deep, profound, it's not a battle, but it's a chasm between the simple guy sitting on the stool in Sierra Leone and the simple guy sitting on the stool in Appalachia. They have a lot in common, but still the Appalachian guy has bought something. that the guy in West Africa hasn't bought, and that is that science can answer why questions.
Mm-hmm.
And he believes that. And the priest has become the scientist. And that priest is going to offer absolution, like a better air conditioner or a better, I don't know, transmission. It's coming from the priests. And then in Africa, at least it's changing. There's still a belief that I don't know, what's going to happen? Probably not going to fix it, and I'm going to die. So I want to be right with God. So the problem is they're also, quote, poor. And then you start debating about what riches are. Then it gets wild. Then you get lost in a really crazy conversation, because I like my house. I like my car.
Yeah. We love our conveniences. And I talked about this on the stream, how we can even devout Christians can start to, without their knowledge or awareness, can idolize their family, let's say, even, right? Family, the things they have. Well, God is good. He gave me these things. Therefore, you all of a sudden, God is now equivalent to good things, and you wake up one day and you didn't realize when you merge those two, and you have to separate those things, because in the absence of your good things in your house, which could happen, could not happen, but in the absence of those things, you're still like the Sierra Leone guy, left to, are you in communion with God, and how? And so that's what I find it when people talk about all these, like, mostly atheists, by the way, have this notion of like solving all hunger. Ironically, it's mostly Christians, even the splintered, fractionalized Christians that don't agree on everything are doing a lot of like work in those areas. Some maybe have an erroneous starting position that they can fix the world or something like that.
Sure. See it all
but
the time.
What they don't see also is that, like you said, there's a lot of people, living at the base of some Peruvian cliff who aren't given their ultimate happiness because of their amenities. They're in this very basic, simple life. It's the similar, like all these poor guys from Brazil who learn to play soccer in the street, right? It's not equivalent to knowing Christ, obviously, but it's
no,
but
I
what
get
it's
it
pointing
though.
to, you get it, like you get the simplicity of it, that the value and the wealth, that I'm glad you quoted that, because the wealth isn't the amenities. And there might be a lowercase wealth, but I'd even say be careful with this, is saying wealth is family or your, because it can't be, you can have family and not have any
100%.
communion with God. And so it can't be just the family, which in my circles, in the truther community, let's say, there's a lot of like Gnosticism. There's a lot of equating the good with something in the world, basically, like physically, like something you made or something, which, there might be some philosophical tie there, but I always see the pitfall in that, that you can't equate wealth.
I'm not comfortable. What happens with me in these talks, actually, let me ask you, are you comfortable being called conservative or something like that? Like,
no,
it doesn't
not
seem
anymore.
like that fits.
No, not anymore. These questions, what's being conserved, right? Conservative used to be near synonymous with maybe some traditionalism, Christianity, but because of the splintering and the modernity of Christianity in America, we can blame whoever we want there, but it's no longer conserving Christianity, right? So I just saw like this, my friend, he's a Serbian guy named Posh. You should talk to him sometime too. He's in Serbia. He's a cradle Orthodox, and he's been such a great value and friend to me, because in my pursuit and my leaning toward Orthodoxy, I don't want to jump in because it's trendy. I'm really examining it, not like any other thing I've examined, and he's helped a lot. But I was gonna say, there was a point there. It was like something about like grounding.
What are you conserving?
Oh yeah, what are you conserving? Right? Yeah. What are you conserving? He sent me like the stark differences between like an Eastern Orthodox like liturgy and like a modern Catholic one. And it was like,
Did he? Yeah.
it was,
Whoa,
I'll
whoa.
send it to you. It was like it was like, the contrast helped a lot, because you might think if you view them independently without the contrast, maybe you just kind of like let it go or something. But it was like, one was dancing and spinning around and had Lion King music, right? And the
I've
other
seen that.
was, wow, this is circular, muted. In the Orthodox one, it was sacred, and there was nothing.
Whoa.
Yeah, there was
Yeah.
nothing like novel. There was no like moment of novelty where someone does like a move or something. It's
You're not
ordered, and
allowed. Yeah.
no, and
Well,
that's
you're allowed.
preservation.
No, I want to say that you're allowed. But what'll happen is it's like the kid at dinner who keeps playing with his food.
Yeah.
Everyone pretty much gets tired with you.
Yeah, totally. There's a system there. That is a good example of like, what are we preserving? And like, you go, oh, are we preserving a classical liberal foundation for conservatism, which is modern conservatism? It's just classical liberalism.
But
It's all it is.
how did you come? Okay, because I looked at. Okay, I'll admit I'm not in the know with your work, but I learned. I mean, that's enough, right? How, how did you come to this place? Because I don't know. That's an easy place to come to in America. What were you born a Christian, or? By the way, I didn't even know you were leaning toward orthodoxy when I turned on the recording. I didn't know that.
Oh yeah. I was born basically like born again Christian. I don't even know what that is. It's now. I don't know even. I have to look back at what that category would be. And so yeah, very much raised Christian, and my mom would heavily tie it to biblical readings and scriptures. Now, we did go to a variety of different churches that, now looking back, I was like, okay, that's off a little. Like, everything has this like modern thing to it. And I went to a church where the pastor had a white ponytail and a red fender and snakeskin boots and a Mercedes, and there was a button, literally a button you push, like It's a Wonderful Life, where the pool opens up for baptisms on the stage, like electronically, right?
You made
So
that up.
no, I swear, it's called the Full Gospel Tabernacle, Pastor James Finn, Catskill, New York. That's exactly what was going on in there.
You saw the pool do the thing?
I saw. Yeah. So there's that. And so yeah, my like journey, I went atheist. I don't actually believe there's actual atheists. For like 15 years, moved to LA, did the whole hedonist thing, special.
Were you good at it?
At that, yeah. I was good at the cool drawstring pants guy, funny, nice. Shocking, invert everything. I'm an artist. I don't have to be understood, kind of thing. And I realized at some point I had no real commitments. And so I couldn't defend my worldview. I couldn't ground morality. I couldn't. And as an artist, especially someone who wants to create, there's nothing more hellish, right? As an experience, to be a creative person and not know what you're saying, like not know what you have to say. You're just doing stuff, right? The best you can do with that is technically be good at rendering something, like
That's
realistically.
Right.
But if you have nothing to say and you want to say something, it's like not having air, right? It's like drowning. And so that bothered me too a little bit.
And there's pressure on you because you kind of must feel like a faker.
Right. Yeah, you're totally. Yeah. I mean, that's what it came down to. It was, I'm full of shit. Basically, the harshest version of it was that. I would say I wasn't even capable of faking, because faking would then at least there would be something true to fake. I was like, you can't put me in any box, and that's my box. Like, you can't put me in any box, which is just self-refuting. It's almost like arguing truth doesn't exist. It's like a liar walking around arguing that the truth doesn't exist. You're like, well, it makes you a liar then. So that got frustrating. Obviously, I then had my first child, which changed everything.
Yeah.
I looked at having my first child as like a strainer, like the ultimate colander that a man can hold if he's willing to shake out everything that's not. Talk about apophatic, like just everything that's not true. Nothing. anything you think you believe that you're actually clearly not willing to teach that child. There was a lot of it. There was a lot of
That's a
it.
good point.
Yeah, you just go, oh, okay, that's not none of that matters. And I was free enough and able to just be like, okay, that's it. Then I would say my direction of art started with like just basic, silly, topical stuff. And then I discovered Jay Dyer. I'm sure you're familiar.
I do know who
Okay.
Jay Dyer is.
So
I went to
my
his
interactions.
wedding, weirdly,
Oh,
but
oh,
I wasn't
interesting.
invited. It's hard to explain.
Okay.
He was getting married nearby, and my wife was like, "Hey, I got invited." I was like, "Okay, I'll go." And it was a casual, cool,
Oh,
different
that's
kind of
cool.
thing. And I met him there. Yeah, I met him at his
So
wedding.
that's awesome. So yeah, he interacting with him. I've been on his podcast a couple times, and he was very influential because he does a lot about paradigms, about how like when you're examining worldviews, you can't just choose particulars that sound good and make a buffet of a worldview. You can, people do it all the time, but it won't be coherent because you're still not addressing through what paradigm are those things even good or true. The things you're picking off the buffet table. And some people go, well, they're just self-evident. It's inherent, right? All these things, the Gnostic approach, the universe, this hodgepodge, right? The Russell Brand approach, right? That everything's got the same amount of truth. You just have to get to the right aisles to pick them out and put them in your little shopping cart. And he was definitely instrumental in re-examining my views, which actually impacted my work, because then I started going after the worldview level, not the particular level, which I still do. But going after the worldview level is so much more fun and challenging because you have to be really concise in your critiques in these very otherwise exhaustive views, right? Like, I mean, how easy it is to go ahead.
No, well, can people understand your worldview as per your art? Are they?
Yeah, they understand my view. Yeah, it's smuggled in.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
when it's smuggled in, you must get a lot of. I notice your art, you're willing to fight, so you
Yeah.
must get a lot of rejection, I would think, and then followed by a willingness to engage, because it's not a normal left, right, blue, red thing that's
No,
happening with you.
it's true. Yeah, no, the left right is not about truth. It's about a side winning. And that's I think that's the next level is you go, well, no, I have to be fighting for what's true and arguing for what's true, not what's otherwise if you argue for a team, you'll make concessions and you'll put your convictions on the shelf and be like, well, I had to because, I didn't want my team to lose. Whereas if you're fighting for truth, you can say what you believe to be the case or not to be, and it's okay because you're not trapped by the paradigm and people are confused by that. They go, they say like, Jim Bob, why are you infighting? And I go, what am I fighting in and with who? And they can't answer, right?
You're
Because
just stating your principles.
right. And it's like, that distinction, like, let's say the battle of good and evil, a lot of times have nothing to do with your pragmatic preferences, right? Because you said you prefer to have the house and the things, right? But when it comes down to it, if it was a moment of moral, really strained making a moral distinction, you would lose your house in order to pursue the right thing. Of course, there's a magnitude, right? No, we hope so. But that's a distinction. Even knowledge of that distinction seems to be lost in these lower, in my view, these lower dialectic, I call them ping pong games, right? You're just like playing ping pong in these like left, right, or socialist, communist, like all this. It's so silly.
Have you had to suffer as you challenge modernity?
Oh yeah. I had my count up to 115,000. And then I started, the impulse for someone who wants to preserve that starts to water themselves down. And I did the opposite. Went after a little more drastic things, like I think NASA is something that isn't popular necessarily in the accepted authorized circles. of talking in art and media. You question NASA and you're looked at as a lunatic. So I was like, yeah, but if I fundamentally like question this stuff, especially looking to the beginnings of NASA. Someone like Jack Parsons, who he called Crowley as, he had an intimate relationship with Crowley and called him his father, right? And explicitly did sex rituals, right? Magic rituals and all this stuff. And he's like the fundamental cornerstone of modern cosmology and NASA, right? And so
Right.
I can't just separate that knowledge, right, from the current exhibition I call NASA. But that's a whole other, that could be a whole
Well,
other
can I
thing.
say one thing that actually
Mhm.
attracted me when I was digging around in your work?
Mhm.
Now I don't know all the theories, and I saw you digging into some stuff that I was like, I don't understand that. But I will understand. I will tell you one thing that I do understand that already makes me with you on NASA is how much money do we spend to go to space?
63 million a day.
It doesn't make any sense. To me, it's one of the most awful things. It's self-hatred of our human being. I do not understand it. We're all right
Yeah.
here. We're all right
Oh yeah,
here,
no,
bro.
it's a full-on theology. It's like I would say there's some overlap. I would have to get into the more details. I previously looked at it, but like there's some leftover like Kabbalism in there. There's a direct correlation between some Kabbalistic stuff, old mystical magic, and astrophysics, and the way astrophysics explains reality. There's this coincidental overlap that's so mingled in. But then you're right. Every time you watch someone report from wherever they are on CNN or whatever, and they talk about the thing they're doing a little bit in the front, mesmerize everyone. And they always, I guarantee you, every time you watch it, they always come back to some sort of universalism. We don't see borders from up here. We're all the same.
Always.
We're so small and little, and you're little and you don't matter really, and they're just driving it home like it's like some waitress telling you a really horrible dish with a big smile on their face and being like, and then and everyone's like, wow.
I feel like NASA's trying to kill us, but I know hold on. I don't mean like shooting stuff at us.
Right. I understand.
Because they take this beautiful idea that let's say it's true, which I believe it is. I'm made in God's image, which makes me big. And then just
But
keep
also small.
shrinking me. Right. But also, right. Paradoxically small.
It's a half true. It's a half truth that they're telling, right?
Right. But they shrink me then and keep telling me about what the meaninglessness of our being on this earth, and take this whole beauty, of the incarnation, or really the beauty that God became man so man can become God. Whoa, 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 whoa. Like that's like a profound challenge to me as a child growing up, to become like my creator. Think about it. And all NASA does is fly out far away and then tell me how worthless I am. It's just tiring. It's just tiring.
Yeah. I think their job, and what I mean, and you're right, especially from an Orthodox perspective, that they're trying to kill you. And if by kill you, you mean hide the knowledge of God, separate you from the knowledge of God. That's death. That's spiritual death before you die, right? Like that. And they want to do that, and they want to separate because they want to make it an evolutionary thing. They apply the evolutionary language into space now. A star was born, right? This isn't physics language. A star was born. That's meaningless in physics, right?
I don't think
physics.
They can use science language in that sense.
They can't.
The narrative won't work. We won't get it.
It doesn't work. They need to use poetry. They need to actually have a book called it's by, I think he was actually Oriental Orthodox, but his name was the great Michael Rabo. It's written 1,000 years ago. He writes a whole account of creation, right? It's a book this thick. Now, coincidentally, NASA has a lot of their associates and workers read this book for some reason. So you get this sense, right, on the superficial level through media, that NASA's just strict materialist, and they don't believe in silly gods.
That's the way I understand it, yeah.
But it's not true. They actually borrow language, like you said. You can't use just the physics hard language of physics to describe these notions. they have to use some, they have to borrow from a theology. And so they do mix and mingle, but they borrow from Christianity, and they borrow from some other mystical stuff. And they basically create a paradigm for your cosmology. And people think, oh, you're so silly. People think I'm silly mostly because they have a naturalistic paradigm that doesn't account for good and evil, right? These kind of battles that actually do occur. And I think it's wrong for even someone who's skeptical of NASA to not also acknowledge there's spiritual warfare occurring. It's not just these materialistic atheists who are just like, we're going to learn more about the physical world. No, there's a telos embedded, right? There's a value claim, even on their website or their Twitter handle. You know what their slogan is? There's space for everyone. Like, this concept is a metaphysical claim. This is not a scientific notion. There's no place in describing the physical world where you insert there's space for everyone. That's an ought claim. That's a value.
I want to
claim.
ask you a question about, let me take a break, Andrew.
Okay.
Cut in a break here. And then I have a question for you on that exact issue. First Things Foundation sends people to live on 5 different continents for 2 years at a time, living simply mud huts, adobe homes, getting around on public transport, and getting to know culture by learning local languages. We want you to go, and you should. We're looking for 2 field workers from Mozambique. That's East Africa. Sacrifice is the beginning of creation. Let's go. Change your life and go serve others at First Things Foundation. All right, here's the question. Let's come back, my brother. So I'm coming back, Andrew, Jeremy. Okay, so here's my question about that. There's this consciousness level where you and I right now, I am purposely doing an interview with you to purposely increase the amount of awareness about these deep ideas, these old world, new world ideas, the idea of the Enlightenment, in order to kind of join people in something like a cause that's beautiful, in order to help fund both our work, but also to make us in relationship so that we may live a more beautiful life. So I'm consciously aware. Whether or not it's happening, I don't know. That's a different thing. You're consciously aware of what you're doing. To what degree do you think people who have the worldview you were just describing, that there's this underlying sort of esoteric religion, or there's an esoteric ecumenism or Gnosticism or whatever it is, how aware do you think, if we put 100 in a room, how conscious are they of their plan? What do you think?
Ooh, that's just it would be totally speculation.
Agreed.
Because they could be aware that there's something. In other words, I kind of relate that question to like someone who goes, "Oh, you really think an atheist can't sense what's moral and not?" And I say, "No, they can. They just can't tell me what that is, what the basis is." So I think there's a similar question where, can those people in that room access some sort of notion of towards something, like a goal, like there's something that's that they're here, a purpose for. I think most people live, even if someone who argues a materialistic worldview, they almost do performative contradictions daily by talking to people, by debating, right? By pursuing some idea of good in the world. So I think in a way they're unconscious at some magnitude, but they're conscious that they're trying something, they're doing something. So when you your example of you're conscious and I'm conscious and we know what we're trying to do, I think they're actually aware to that level. I think the next level is why questions, which is why you brought that up with the science. Like, science never tells us why we ought to value science, right? They can't. There's no scientific experiment with a tube and some Bunsen burner, and suddenly they look in and it's, oh, we found the it matters matter molecule. And that's kind of like the fun joke God played, is that the things that actually matter to human beings, even the materialist ones, are not made of matter. I find that so fascinating and funny to me. Like, I actually give God credit for some level of humor because of the way language emerges, and you create these like funny little dichotomies where everyone's chasing matter as physical, but the pursuit itself of chasing physical knowledge can't be justified by the physicality of it itself. There's nothing in a tree that tells you the truth of things, right? So I think that's just funny. I pull that card all the time with empiricists, where I ask them to find why, show me the empirical evidence that we should value empirical evidence, and they're just stumped.
What do you think happened? So I don't know. What, by the way, what do people call you? Is it Jim Bob or Jim?
Or
Jim Bob. Jim Bob, right?
Mm-hmm.
Jim Bob, I'm John. We already know this.
John. Yeah.
Because you have this beautiful, well, I don't know if it's beautiful, but it's an impressive, your presentation online. I mean, you're known. You're Jim Bob, and I love it. It's a beautiful, I don't call it a branding or whatever it is. So I was interviewing a Rasta named John Mason for this show. I'm a sucker for Rastafarianism, and not because I worship it or am involved in it, but those cats are authentic about a lot of stuff and not just weed. Okay. They try to live this ascetic life that they borrowed in a lot of ways from the Ethiopian Orthodox, and not all of it. And there's something about it I like. And people on my show, and like my wife, really my brother's gonna be like, not that again. Not that again. But yeah, that again. I love those guys. But I was interviewing him, and his name is John Mason, but that's not his name. So I was calling him Ja during the that doesn't really work. You know what I mean? You don't be interviewing a guy and calling him God. So halfway through, I said, what the hell is it? Mason? He's like, no, man, it's Anthony. So then I just called him Anthony. But you're Jim Bob. That's Jim Bob.
Yeah, Jim Bob. Yeah, Jim Bob. So that's funny.
I can't remember what my point was, but I think what I want to get at with you all the time is like, can we use humor? So we call this heavy things done lightly, but you do that online, man. Your stuff is like top notch.
Thank you.
Philosophical, highbrow, but with a lot of humor. I don't know if we can afford to not do it that way in this weird world that's collapsing on itself. Like, what do you think? What's the role of humor in all of this?
Oh, yeah. I think humor, I think it's important because I think it softens the heart a little bit in some cases if it's done right. There's humor that I believe does the opposite, of course. But humor also, it can't be funny, really funny. It can't be funny unless it's true. And so I think humor and truth go hand in hand.
Yeah, that's
and when something's not true, people might laugh, but they're laughing in a nervous way. You know what I mean? Like you go to like a comedy show and someone goes to some topic and they think they're making a funny joke because everyone's laughing, but they're nervously laughing. And so that's I don't call that comedy. So I think the relationship between comedy and truth is that all comedy requires a premise first. So I did even stand-up comedy a little bit when I was in LA for a couple of years. And I did get quickly the system of it. The template is you get up, you say a premise. The premise itself has to be true, or at least ring generally true for people's ears to perk up and go, okay. Then you can deliver the punchline or the act out. Then it's possible. Now, I think the reason humor is so important now is twofold. One, it's a really soft way to access their listening, right? It breaks like a shell, right?
That's
This is going to be comedy. Oh, I agree with the premise. My ears are open. But also, I believe currently that we're in a war of premises, right? So if we're in a war of truth, good and evil, paradigms, clashing paradigms, these are all presuppositional. And so I look at presuppositions similar, not the same exactly, to premises for humor, where there's a setup. You're stating the foundation, right? And then you're arguing the particulars. You're the same with humor. You set the foundation, then the particular is the punchline, but the punchline isn't itself the joke. The wholeness of the premise and the punchline is the joke as one thing. It's not one. You can't remove one and the other.
Right.
Some premises are funny on their own, by the way. But I think that's what's going on, and I guess that's really a good way of putting it. I don't think I've heard it that way. Is yours? What did you say? Heavy things lightly?
Heavy
Something
things done lightly. Yeah.
right. I think that's why you need access to their, in a way, their heart. I think that's why music itself, even beyond comedy, I think it's not an accident, let's say, that the music industry is one of the most inverted, Satan riddled industries, because that gets access to your spirit. That's where, if we were to
Absolutely.
rejoice and sing, which we're commanded to do, I mean, if that's our access, one of our accesses to that joy, to even to worship, right? The sound. I went to a liturgy and I was moved to tears just by the antiphons. Like, there was no understanding. I think it was in Greek, maybe not. But the point
Still,
is that there's a direct highway to your heart, right? And so I don't think it's an accident that the battle for minds and hearts, especially for kids, is delivered through the musical medium, even more so than the comedic medium, because
well,
comedy is a little more sophisticated than
agreed.
music.
So I think you're talking about the nature. You could almost say truthful things done beautifully, but
Mhm,
the heavy things done lightly. So this is not to take a shot at Jay Dyer, but
mhm,
there is a type of conversation that I was deeply engaged with. Even I did aid work overseas, yada yada, and then I did a long period in education where I was involved in starting schools, and basically everything was very heavy in the way I engaged everything, very heavy. And kids really liked it. They really liked it. But what would happen is it would become so heavy that it almost becomes untenable, you know? It almost becomes like, isn't there something else to this conversation? Because you seem to have all the conversation correct. And then I think about a good, really good materialist argument. They do so good at locking all the points down. But what happens is you're still not convinced. And I think that's what's run out on the new atheists. I think between the 90s, 1990 and 2010, they won the argument in the media, but there was like no joy.
mhm.
There was no sense of beauty in that atheistic argument. And they tried to say it, like contact with, like, look how beautiful all this cold, deadly space is. I'm like,
Right.
I don't
Or
know what.
liberty. They appeal to
Right.
liberty too, right?
Yes, and that's a libertarian. That's a
Mhm.
libertarian move. And I think what's happening now is the postmodernists or postmodernism is something like this, man. I need some beauty. And the postmodernists, sometimes they're my dear friends, these guys,
Mhm.
because they're actually searching around in what amounted to a cold space for something beautiful that they're going to call themselves and their own expression or something like that.
Mhm.
That's not really that beautiful, but there's something about their urge that I honor, and I'm
Yeah,
there.
oh, totally. That points to the what's called in it's actually the title of a book called The Myth of Divine Neutrality, because there is no neutrality. Like the same people you're talking about, who are your friends, I have friends like that too. They can't help it. It's in us to seek and assert, or to attribute divinity to something, right?
Mm.
Now, I believe you can only attribute that coherently to one God, the Christian God, but the notion of doing so is embedded, right? So there's that feeling of like, well, now everything's sterile, now everything is just mechanical. well
Mm.
well what else now? Like, the beauty and the mechanics can't be the beauty can't be identical to the mechanics, right? you're
Right,
you're then
right.
describing mechanics. So that's where they tried to get them. They go, the Richard Dawkins, oh, the beauty, you don't need God for beauty. It's just the ultimate machine. It's like, why isn't that beautiful enough? And you go, what's the basis for beauty, Richard? And then he's stumped, right? It's not. You can't just state anything as beautiful, and that
That's right.
gets into why even aesthetics is a metaphysical category, that's linked to the good, and that the good needs, because if you say something's beautiful, you're saying also that we ought to appreciate it. So
Mm.
there's a moral uh, entailment, right?
Mhm.
Unless you're just like totally an arbitrary person where you just go like anything's beautiful, man. Like everything's beautiful.
I think people are
Um,
trained to say that. I don't know.
Yeah, oh, totally, totally. They're given their little scripts, and I mean, even you're talking about getting like the backlash of some of my posts. I recently did one where it's this atheist holding, it's just a zoom in on him, and you always get this thing, oh, you trust a 2,000-year-old book or whatever, which is the funniest argument, because like the same person, they'll discover some old book pre-Christianity or something, and they'll celebrate the knowledge of the book, right? But I have him in the second frame holding like the Destiny of Species book by Darwin. Like the irony that just because something's a book doesn't negate it, nor does it affirm it. And so there's more to what we assign truth and value to, aside from, in other words, if you wrote a book on logic, you wouldn't say the basis of truth is this book of logic, but it's written in this book. So logic isn't true because of this book. The book is true because of logic, right? And so I would say the same is for Christianity, where the atheists try to get you to take a misstep and say God is identical to the Bible, let's say, like the physical thing, right?
But Christians in the West did that to themselves.
Yeah, they did. They did. Yeah, they did. They took a bunch of different approaches, and also they did the ultimate. And what we saw really rampant, even the last 2 years with the Corona stuff, is that people, if they're pushed into a pragmatic choice, they'll sometimes take the deal. And I think that was just a microcosm of what happened to just like general Christianity, where people were like, well, I need to go to the store. I have to take the government money because I need to stay open. Yeah. What else am I going to do? These kind of weak approaches. That's actually another thing that drew me to orthodoxy, at least at the cultural warfare level, where I started looking around and going, wow, they're not budging, a lot of them, on this stuff. Some of them, some of the, would accept a general narrative that I wouldn't accept, but I didn't make that the basis for whether or not they were awake, as I would call people, if they see something's not quite true about all of this. That whole trade-off.
It was a gradation, right? It was a gradation, and then, but basically the Orthodox, I think, they didn't go all in with the government. Now there were bishops that did. How did you do in the pandemic? Like, as a person trying to manage feelings, emotions, mindsets, how did you do?
At first I was very angry, and I felt like I was in a total, like a movie,
like a psyop,
movie, like when there's this feeling of like you're the only one who has it correct and everyone else doesn't, and you feel like you're in the total upside down, where no one's believing you, and you can't believe they're accepting such craziness, and you're like, I cannot believe how people are acting right now. It was like that. I went through a little bit of a panic, not because of the narrative, but because of how easy it was for sort of a group of conglomerates, corporate and government, to basically deliver a narrative and have everyone really just interact through their screens. And basically what I saw is the power of a screen informing reality that's not actually consistent with physical reality. In other words, like
around you, right around you, you could live a life that wasn't consistent with the
whole thing. Yeah. It was like I saw this one comic. It was a person looking at their phone and the weatherman telling him it's raining and it's sunny out, and he's holding an umbrella. And he's like, the screen is telling him his reality, even though his direct reality doesn't add up with the screen. And I think that was one of the main things really in play, once you really look at it, is that there's this, I call it the guidance system, because again, I do a lot of like critique of NASA, and I see the guidance system of NASA, they sell it as, oh, it's the system that tells the ship what to do. I think that's just a euphemism for, you're giving a bunch of people data points, right? And you're guiding them through systems and screens to tell them what reality is. And there's no there's no reference point for the ordinary consumer of data to reference to know if it's true or not. They just have to kind of go with it. I equate it to like I used to scare my brother. I knew he was afraid of spiders, and I would tell him there's a spider on him. And even if he kind of knew I was messing with him because I had done it enough times, he still wiped his shoulder.
Yeah.
Right? You freak out, you react. So I think that is like the best analogy I can do, because at a wide scale, I think there was a bunch of people who just were reacting as if there were spiders on them, because it was more useful to just assume that was the case, just in case it was, right? So I'm going to do all these things just in case, right? Maybe this really is bad. I should maybe take precautions. And all of our heroes, I went after Peterson pretty hard too.
Yeah, what's your gig with Peterson?
I just poke at him because
you do a nice
thank you.
Peterson voice.
Yeah. Well, that was I knew he was kind of like a pseudo intellectual. I saw right away that he was just borrowing the bones of Christianity and then making a self-help gig. And I think a lot of people see that. Now, when he cries and stuff, people maybe go, well, I'm going to give him the benefit of doubt. Maybe he is coming to. Maybe he is gearing toward it, but he's just having a tough time. I'll grant a little bit of that, but he was elevated to success because he stood for these like really strong convictions, and he spoke out for years against authoritarianism. Then this thing hits, right, where you look around and you go, I don't see anyone fainting and dying. I just see a lot of people like panicking, looking at a screen. What did he say? He said, well, I think it's best we just sit tight for 6 months. It's like, we'll just work it out. You're like, 6 months is a pretty good amount of time for, let's say, this unelected technocracy to take over supply chains, right? To shut down small businesses, to get people in debt, to try to maybe create a scale out some UBI, whatever they want to do, right? That whole system was so many people. It was like a bunch of different categories of industries eating a wool carcass. It was like the media version, the Zoom, the virtual reality, genomics, vaccines, media. I mean, everyone could take a bite of this thing. And he's sitting there going, yeah, just, everything I just told you up to this point, just put it on hold and wait for the authoritarians to kick in.
I see.
That was the point where he lost me. And then he's like, I'm going back on tour. You look, I would never pay to see him, but I just checked. Lo and behold, I go to his site, the bottom, it says you have to be vaccinated to see him talk, right? So this inconsistency needs to be highlighted, right? And so, yeah, maybe the criticisms can go too far, but that guy needed to be outed for a number of reasons, and I just gave you a couple. There's probably more though.
Do you think so? I wouldn't pick up a lot of these arguments against what you're saying. I just, in my own personal life, they make sense to me. The thing is, I don't know.
Right.
I like to remind people I don't know, and so mostly about that stuff, I can tell you what happened in my own soul and what happened around my neighborhood, and that wasn't much in terms of neighborhood. Okay.
Yeah.
I was in South Carolina, so we can debate all that. But do you think? I just had a great talk with a guy that comes on my show. He's one of my postmodern sort of atheist friends, and we call him Uncle Seth. He comes on and we battle in a good way. I love the guy.
Yeah.
Do you think we can put it back together? So I think there's a meta conversation about what's falling apart. That's got nothing to do with the pandemic. I think it's coming apart anyway. I think the pandemic is actually an example of what was already broken. I don't think the pandemic is like some autonomous event. Like, I don't really think like that. Especially
I agree.
Especially when people, Jim Bob, are telling you there's another one coming. It always freaks me out. I'm like, how do these people know this stuff? I don't get it.
Well, I think they know that for the same reason you are looking at it. They just have a different conclusion where they try to make these things very significant, but like you said early in this chat, there's nothing new under the sun. It's just another attempt to have you basically worship a false authority, establish false authority in man, right? I think at the highest spiritual summarization of it all is where's your faith? Is it in men, right? Strictly in men, right? Or is it in God? Do you really believe, like for any Christians, do you really believe, not just like it's useful, it's a nice story. Do you really believe that there's only one story happening and you're in it, but it's not your story, right? It's his story. And so if you really believe that, it actually frees you, because it's not a question of what should I do in my life to make this life worth it so I can leave behind some historical evidence that I mattered, this kind of stuff, right? My legacy. No, you're in someone else's story, right? There's a beginning, middle,
But
and
you know
end
what
to
that
it.
is, Jim Bob? The Muslims taught me this living in Africa. That's obedience. You have to realize you're obeying or trying to bend yourself toward the will of the story you're in, not retell this. You don't get to retell that. Can you imagine? You don't get to retell that story. You're participating in it, which means you should probably obey the physics of it. It has its own embodiment. The story has its own way of being. You should participate in it as it is, and not try to bend the story to what you want it to be. And I think the American experiment is the
latter.
experiment of bending it.
Yeah. So I think you're right. I think that the whole experiment is, even with I call them the founding feathers with their little feather pens.
I saw that. I saw some of your art on that.
Yeah, they go, well, let's just twist it a little, and we'll include God general. We'll include a deistic view, right? Where it's just general, where, all man created, are given God's, rights or whatever, these concepts of rights, even, right? All of these concepts, they're really bending God's moral law into a man's version, a modern man's legal version of it, like a legal document to replace the Bible, right? And you realize, well, that just leads, again, what it led to is classical liberalism, individualism, and basically the withering away of something bigger than man's personal pursuits, right? It's not an accident that Ayn Rand elevated herself to notoriety. The woman who doesn't blink, selling men. The greatest value is your pursuit of your own wants and desires. That's what you do. And they ate it up. They were like, yeah, I get to sin a lot and it's okay, I get to abandon my disciplines, right? That's all it's saying. It's straight up do as thou wilt, right? So do as thou wilt is I believe tied to this sort of enlightenment, the founding fathers. The American experiment is mostly individual based, and it actually withers away something more foundational than just your own pursuits, because liberty itself is not equal to good. Just look at San Francisco, look at Burning Man. Liberty itself is not the good, right? And people don't grasp that, especially on the right. These libertarian based so-called conservatives are really arguing for a liberal view, right?
Jim Bob, you are an interesting spot right now. You got to keep going, man, because you articulate you're an artist. Your stuff is funny. I don't know about everything that's happening, quote, where you are in that world, whatever that world is. I'm in it too, man. But I mean, I'm interviewing you and we're sitting together. I don't know, because there's a lot of what I would say illiberal. I don't mean they're progressive. I mean, there's some authoritarian mojo over there that makes me nervous, that if it's not grounded in the context of the church, it really is just pretty ugly. It's dangerous stuff. And so I'm not really all in on that, the alt stuff. But I will say you're in an interesting place, because I feel like you and I are both having the same conversation about a third way. There's another way, to be, where you look like, really, like, I always say the best Orthodox, how about this? The most spiritually inclined person on one day can look super lefty, and on the same day look super righty. And in fact, you probably want him to look like that. You want him to be off because he's not of this world, or she's not of this world. So that's interesting to me.
Yeah. it's totally the case because what the thing you were saying before with this bending, right? Well, let's bend. What's interesting about bending is like that's what a revolution is. It's this bending that connects to itself as a circle, but from a Christian worldview, there is no revolution. There's no revolution, right? You don't. That's conforming to the world, right? So
yes, that's
this
right.
bending of the will, bending toward your will, is conforming to the world, the things of the world, right? But the bending of anything will just lead you in a circle, right? There's no telos. There's no like
That's right.
objective place
That's
to get
right.
to. You can't get to truth from a circle, right?
That's right.
You bend.
Right.
And that word is so present, right? There's a revolutionary spirit, in certain sections of Christianity, definitely in Judaism, but also beyond that, there's a revolutionary spirit in like this new Enlightenment, New Age, Russell Brand version. There's a revolution in the general truther community, which I'm sort of in, where they sort of bend closer to mysticism and Gnosticism and like these takes about mathematics and numerology and all these secret esoteric and occult knowledge that we have to gain from the world.
Yeah, that's
And
that Freemason mojo, right?
totally, and it's very appealing to them. Why? Because they really don't maybe believe that this isn't all there is. Because if you can't get over it, if you really believe this is all there is, where else could you go but to conform to the world? There's no other. It would be actually logically consistent to conform to the world if you think the world is all there is.
I tell you, my spiritual. I would quote my spiritual father. If you guys out there are Orthodox, you know that that's something that happens in the Orthodox world. But I'm quoting here my spiritual mate, my wife, who saves me all the time. So we're having these debates all through the pandemic, and trying to run this nonprofit and send people out in the world is hard. It's hard to keep people at sight. It was hard to keep people doing these small projects and helping people and yada yada. And then you're hearing about the shots, and then you hear about the mandates, and you just start to realize, who are these people? This is like, we got to do something, like we were talking about, like, and then I'm saying, what do we do? And she's like, I think we do exactly what we did the day before you heard the word pandemic, or the day before you heard about your mom dying, or the day before you heard about any apocalypse, bro. You're just going to stay humble, love your neighbor, look toward God with awe and respect and honor and love. And then that's what you're going to do. Like that's prepping.
That is, I agree.
That's all she kept saying. And I kept wanting her to have this plan.
No, you need, that's exactly what we get into. If you have any following at all and you have any influence, they start coming out of the woodworks and going, Jim Bob, it's not enough. Where's your, we got to do the plan. Thing. You go, what thing? Did you see any face paint on me? Like, do you want me to get on a horse and scream with a Mel Gibson wig? Like, where are you going? Like, I always ask, where are you going? And immediately they have to say, well, not here. Well, no, if you're actually in, you're in the world, but not of it, you have to battle these things here and now. Like it's with you, it's with your spirit, it's with your, where you go. And so if you go to this, again, if you think that the battle of good and evil is physical, then you're going to be always in the weights wanting, because you'll never be able to isolate what's good and evil in the world, and you'll never find an outcome that aligns with the metaphysical view, because it's fundamentally two different categories. There's the world and not of it. There's the metaphysical. There's heaven and earth. These things are all perpetually cited and referenced, even throughout the Bible. This distinction, right, of the things we want versus the things we just have. The things, this battle of wanting, right, is endless, right? And it's like, if your want is not communion with God, you're going to be left just unfulfilled.
That I would call that out of alignment. And by the way, this isn't about preaching. That's not what it's about. It's not any more preaching than it is when you hear, a basketball player asking how do I make this free throw go in? You
Mhm.
want the free throw to go in, man. Show me. And what I'm saying is I'm learning every day. Like my wife is teaching me, like, I want the free throw to go in. I want to be in alignment with the way I'm supposed to live. But people hear religious.
Mhm.
That's also a red herring. That's also not possible to not be religious as a human being. In fact, I think that's the very characteristic of our nature. That's what makes us not a dog, like
Right.
I think. But
I believe that too. Yeah.
well,
Even to
look,
argue otherwise is, is being religious. Like I always find it funny, especially the vegans I get into it with. They make these value claims about um, animals that try to equalize us. But then you ask for the animal that's having the same conversation about us, and they're not to be found. So we're the ones doing philosophy and moral evaluations about animals and trying to equal, and yet you go, well, obviously there's a contradiction in the very notion of making these claims, because the animals aren't doing it.
wow.
They're not sitting around debating, well, we're not that different than human beings. Like, we both evaluate moral decisions and stuff, and we both believe XYZ. No, they don't. They don't. The animals are not doing that, you
I
know.
know, I know, but
So
wow, that's the Desert Fathers, the ancient sort of spiritual leaders of the of Christianity. They say crazy stuff about animal behavior that they wouldn't even tear themselves apart. They wouldn't, lions wouldn't hunt lambs, except for that we have that in our heart. They've taken our lead. In other words, the volcano goes off and smothers people because of my heart. Think about that. Because the power, the majesty they place inside the human soul is that it is the leader of everything we see in creation, because God has made it so. I like that when humans are uplifted. It should be that we take on that great challenge, not that the evolutionary narrative makes us one of the others and just one of many, and we just happen to be at the top because our brain's bigger. It's so
yeah, it's this big,
destructive.
it's this so silly argument, this concept of an accident. But also, like, you couldn't even come to that conclusion, because you really, even from a strict evolutionary position, it's not only that we are different particular organisms in a giant mechanism, but if you're really honest with the naturalist take, you really couldn't even make ultimate distinctions between animals and man at all. Like, they wouldn't even be categories, because it would all just be one massive mechanism that would reduce humans and whatever platypuses as just molecular things, like
Oh, that's a good.
molecular, like from the highest, the lowest resolution, there is no distinctions. It's just one machine. It's monism. It's all is one. And so, yeah,
But
it gets so silly.
by the way, you could argue. So I'm one that looks at history, and I study history and say we confuse often the outcomes with the inputs. So we
Hmm.
think like, oh, look, the reason that we're so good at technology is because we've learned. But I would argue that the input of material atheism allowed for the technology. In other words, when we shifted our worldview and our paradigm, it allowed us to create things we would have never even conceived of before, because that wasn't our telos. It wasn't our goal to feed ourselves to the point of obesity. The goal was to meet God. Now, don't get me wrong, not everybody's doing that, but the conversation, however limited it was in culture, was to meet God. Therefore, why am I doing a steam engine again? And there wasn't a way to conceive of the steam engine, not because I wasn't capable of it. Like, there's this weird evolutionary argument, well, we became capable of it or something. We were always capable, but we didn't want it, or at
Right.
least
It's yeah,
culturally.
it's efficiency as the end, right?
Right,
Confusing
as the God,
efficiency. Yeah,
almost as the
you
God.
can't, because efficiency, it's not even coherent, because efficiency describes an arbitrary goal. Are you effective in X? But efficiency itself is now sold as the goal. Are we being effective? And
go.
no one questions, well, no, the goal is obvious. It's to survive. The evolutionists will say, well, it's just to survive and pass on genes. No, you're assuming that, right? And you're appealing to efficiency. And so when this is the difference in even in architecture that we see, there was no real efficiency to these beautiful structures, right?
Yeah,
You didn't value efficiency to make the piazza or the beautiful cathedral with the floating dome or an arch, right? An arch to the entryway. It's symbolic. It's appealing to experience. It's not appealing to effective use of real estate. Now, when we switch over, like you said, from the materialist brain, we look to efficiency, and that's why now everything is in gray beige boxes, in shapes that can consolidate and make use of every square inch.
Right.
And then you realize, well, that's not what gives us joy and value in communion with God. Is it's not efficiency. Efficiency isn't the God.
No.
And I think people are realizing, even as you mentioned, your friends who are done with this view in a way, they're looking for some sort of divinity, and obviously it's not found in Amazon warehouses with the best use of space every square foot, right? Because you still go to Italy and you go to the piazza, and some guy who owns the real estate conglomerate in America goes there, and maybe they get a moment where they look and they go, what a waste of real estate. You can shove how many tents, to pay $300 a tent to be on here on Sunday. And you go, no, that's not the purpose of the piazza. Like, that's not the purpose of that form of communion, right? Where everyone's out and there's room and you can cross any direction to get to the opposite side. And it just doesn't make sense to those people.
So what should we do, my little crew here, First Things Foundation folks who like to come to our podcast? We can find you online, right? You do it.
Yeah, MadebyJimBob. I do a live stream on YouTube where, I get a bunch of random people sometimes. I even encourage dissenters to come on and challenge any things that are said. I usually have my buddy Posh. I mentioned the Serbian Cradle Orthodox, and he helps when we talk about scripture or proper interpretation, because I'm learning that even my impulse to talk about orthodoxy still has its rules, right? And I can't just go into it with my own ideas, even if they sound good or they're novel and they're smart or whatever. I'm learning that I can't just talk about this stuff the way I talk about
just like an
everything
iconographer.
else.
You don't get to just whip up the icon. You have, wow, man. Is that hard?
And I like that. I like that because my creative, I like spitting off the cuff and with no consequences, but where there's consequences, I know there's also value. And so I realize, oh, well, that's, this is the hierarchical thing that we all seek anyway. And so I like that. I like the constraints, even in my creativity, like if it's music or painting, I like the constraints also. They actually make it more fulfilling to go, to explore whatever you're making. In this case, discerning scripture, tradition, what's worship? What's worship, right? Is it anything's worship? Well, I reject that because I couldn't go to an art class and say, the teacher's like, we're going to have an art competition, and everyone's like, cool, what are the standards for judging? And they say none. Who's going to win then? We don't know. Whoever's the loudest,
took all the fun
whoever vomits the most on the floor or whatever. And so that's that. I think people watching me in real time examine and ask and inquire about orthodoxy, just documenting it itself is being very valuable to people, because I'm doing it in live, right? I don't share every interaction I have with private conversations with people about it, but people are actually able to see some of the things that I come up against and that other people, and I just let them on the show and talk about it, and then we get into all sorts of really interesting, contentious territory, right? The Gnostics come on and start spouting the numbers and what Jesus is 3.14. Why don't you get it? all this stuff, it brings out the crazy, by the way, because people who know God exists also know in their hearts that the truth is a narrow road. But if it's narrow, then they can't have all these other possible like routes, right? Oh, why can't I just interpret it how I like it, right? And I understand why people get uncomfortable with that. But at the same time, if you're honest, you can't just have this like subjective open up any page to the Bible and whatever, it's like the Bible isn't a giant horoscope, right? Where you just open it any day and go, well, it's amazing that this relates to me today and therefore it's true. That can't be the basis of your biblical appeal, right? And so even if it probably would work, by the way, like you can just, because it's so rich with truth and story and literal truth, but also parables and stuff, it would be hard to argue that any page you open you wouldn't get something, right, of value. You would, but that's not the question. Is through what interpretation are you claiming something's valuable? And this leads you to this hard road toward something that's more narrow and just doesn't permit, like you said with the iconographers, can I just do one Michael Jackson? It's like a callback. Can I do a callback? And you go, no, what are you preserving? Nothing. You're filth. You're perverting everything. So anyway, that's
I think this. I feel like I could talk to you a long time, man. So will you come back and then maybe I'll show up over on your stream and cause some problems over there sometime, because I love the lightly part, man. I like heavy and lightly. Yeah, definitely.
And otherwise, I'm on my 4th book. This is when I do get deleted. This is a sure way of not getting deleted because you can hold it. So this is volume 4. It's called Post-Truth Booster, appropriately. It's 100 pages of really funny comics that comment on philosophy, least philosophy, mostly the nonsense of the last 2 years or so and how ridiculous some of these things are getting. So it's super funny. Every copy is signed personally, and
they're
you can get it made by Jim Bob.
I spent a lot of time looking at. I have to admit, though, Sally made me really happy.
Sally,
but
Sally's a new level.
Sally, keep going. And guys, do pick up that book. We'll include this. Jeremy and I will include this with really bright links. And this was beautiful, man. I really thank you. I really
no problem, man. I really appreciate it.
Gave me a lot of your time. Okay, that was Jim Bob. You can find him at MadebyJimBob. We'll put in the link, and it might even appear right there on your screen. I don't know if Jeremy's in the mood. But that was an interesting interview. I had no idea, Jeremy. I had no idea how deeply sort of invested Jim Bob was in this ancient Eastern Christianity thing. Fantastic. Well, fantastically interesting anyway. I had no idea. Check out his artwork. Check out his memes. Check out where he's going. I mean, he's challenging. He's challenging a lot of people in a beautiful way. At least he's trying to use beauty in order to challenge. I don't know what you think about that. Check him out. Man, was I glad he came on. We had a good talk. This is WAWTAR. This is brought to you by First Things Foundation. We send folks overseas to do hard work in the aid industry known as international aid, but really we're at home too here in Appalachia. Think about joining us. Think about supporting us. I'm asking you right now, become a recurring donor. And when you do, what happens is you get free entry into our portal of classes. You get money off on trips when we take them. And come to the restaurant, we'll give you a free hajapuri. That's a cheese bread. That's delicious. Become a recurring donor and become a friend of First Things Foundation. We need you. It matters. So, not dis, au revoir. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for being a part of yet another podcast at WAWTAR.
Stuff stuff is like also biblical. There's certain paths. Don't get me wrong. There's times where you can do it. I do it all the time with the general narratives. I'll use a spokesperson of a certain view and I'll go after them. But when you're friends or brothers, you go one to one. That's biblical. You go one to one. You go to them. And because you go to them, that in itself shows a respect, right? It's out of the public. It shows intimacy that if you really cared about the thing they were saying and you disagreed or you thought you were concerned, you wouldn't just go to the podcast and do it. You would go to the person, right? Yeah. And so, that's why that even to me like reaffirms my Christian faith, because everything that whole system, what we just went over, is based in personhood, that someone through their energies and their personhood. And that because of that allows you a pathway to interact with them in a way that's good. That's the right way to do it, right? But if there's abstract many, you can attack anybody because it's not personal, right?
So wow, man. I got to tell you, I really want to talk again. I mean, like even be friends, because so I've been an Orthodox convert 25 years and you're clearly heading that way. I don't know where you are on the path, but it doesn't stop, right? Like it doesn't run out. What I found about being a Protestant, when I was Protestant, it ran out. It just so clearly became an earthly system for manipulating matter. Like it just became too dead to me. And I'm not saying anything bad about anybody's tradition.
Right.
But Orthodoxy hasn't run out. Like in 25 years, I could pick up St. John Chrysostom right now and I'd be like, whoa, I never saw that before. It's so rich. It's crazy how far deeply. So what I'm saying is you're on your journey. So count me as a friend, man, however that shakes out. Because
thank you. Yeah.
And my brother too. If you want to be in touch with him, I can put you in touch for sure.
But this is another thing I love about Orthodoxy, is that you can't just give someone a Bible and suddenly they can teach Orthodoxy. And other people are mad at that. Like I disagree with these people who follow me disagree. They're like, well, that can't be the truth, because if God was real and the Bible was real, anybody can pick it up and just read it. And I remember feeling that way. I think even my mom has that sort of inclination where it's like, well, it's so simple, and there's a truth to how simple it is, but you can't conflate with the simplicity of the Bible or a given scripture with the proper context for analyzing it and interpreting it over time, because you're borrowing something in the here and now that required many years of traditions to preserve. And then you just reject the preservation and all the systems that preserved it, but you take it now because it's a finished product. It can't be a finished product in the sense, not to say that you can just add a whole new book or epistles or something. It's that it can't be treated as a thing you just ordered for Walmart and it's like a slinky and it works. You use it in any way you want. It still works as a slinky. It can't be that, because then you can start teaching wrong analysis. You can go, here's what I got.
Out of it. You can't get out of the loop. So I think the same problem modernity made in adopting the scientific world vision, like as it's God, if you want to argue that, is that they believed in this presupposition that there's something like objectivity in the seer. And now quantum physics is showing, whoa, the seer can't actually see. So now the test you can't count on it, because the viewpoint is not what you thought it was. So the Protestants did the same thing with the Bible. They assumed that like God was in it in a way that you could never get it wrong. And they don't realize, which we do as Orthodox, is that the problem is not with the Bible. Obviously, the words are of God. The problem is with you. You don't have the clarity. You don't have if you don't like the word clarity, purity. You don't have the spiritual vision to read that properly. But the church, God's body on earth, has perfected the interpretation in a way where it will help you with where you already are. Just like a wise man or a wise woman, they take you to the park and they take you to the parts of the park you should go to because they know you. So believe me, that was one of the biggest things that led me away from I was an Episcopalian, was the way they did the Bible. It was like, why would I put that in a hotel again? Well, the guy's having a hard day. I'm like, Yeah, but he might just become something totally crazy because of what he read. Are you sure you want to put that in the Bible in the hotel?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a big thing, and it's hard, definitely in my circles, hard for a lot of people to confront because there's a part of us that rejects other men as our authority, right? And there's something
For sure.
impulsive and partly true about it, right? We don't want to put our faith in men themselves, right? Just
For
as
sure.
men. But
For sure.
but then you go, well, no, there is a level of trust with your own dad, right? So we know that it's not faith, but there's trust. And then you go, well, what am I actually trusting here? And then you go, well, then the line of questioning ends up being, well, um, you know, do I believe that man can be God, not you as a man,
No, I know what you're saying.
but Christ,
It's
but
brilliant.
can Christ be a fully God? And I think a lot of people deal with that, whether it's a crappy relationship with their dad or something, or some experience of men in general, humankind, when they rightly say, no, don't put your faith in humankind, humanity. I would say agree. When people say I lost my faith in humanity, I tell them that was the problem to begin with. You didn't lose
Right.
anything. Um, but that's different. But I can see where they get messed up, where they go, well, now man's just trying to make Jesus God to make man God, and that can't be the case, right? And you go, well, no, that's through what interpretation are you coming to that conclusion? So
Right.
now you're in this Wild West, you know, give someone again the grocery cart in the theological store and let them just run through the aisles and get whatever their eye catches, right? And
100%.
so this concept is so self-refuting because you're still appealing to the Bible, right? So
Yep.
all you're doing is saying,
Yep.
I am the authority, I'm the bishop, I'm the pope, and there's no way around it. The reason is, again, the product, the thing you have that you open up, and there's words and there's scriptures and there's a story. You can't appeal to any of it without an assumed proper authority. Now,
That's
the only
right.
question is it you or not? And the answer is it's not you.
This is why
So
you're on this journey, bro. Because the perfect icon in history is the Tübingen Lutherans. So go get this book if you can find it. It might be out of print, but it's a book. It's put out by an Orthodox publisher. I forget who it is. And all it is the letters of the Tübingen scholars. Those are Luther's. Luther died, and then he was like, "You should do what I did." Or I don't know if he
mhm,
said that, but there was a
mhm,
tradition. By the way, that's another thing. There was a tradition. We know it. It's
right.
called Lutheranism. So these cats started to figure out, like, okay, let's write down the things we believe that Luther taught because these are beautiful things. And they started to write down what is Mary, and they started to write down what is communion. And then it's volumes because they were letters written back and forth between the scholars. And then guess what the scholars did? This is like 1574, I think. The scholars wrote to the Orthodox Patriarch, Jonah, and they wrote to him all of their discussions about what they were learning. So it's the perfect icon, which is Catholicism was going bang, bang, bang over here with crazy stuff. Their rationalism is out of control over here. And then the Protestants go whoop and put it all the way over here, and they knew it. So they wrote to the Patriarch, the middle, and said, tell us. And finally, the Patriarch sent them a final letter and said, listen, you've been doing this for 6 years or whatever. You're not listening. Do not write me anymore. And then they published. So you get these opposites that existed during the Reformation. That for Orthodox, for me anyway, when I discovered Orthodoxy, I was like, oh my God, there's a middle. There's a middle that allows me to respect science or whatever that is, and also live in the spiritual world. There's a middle, and I took it.
Yeah.
Full on. Yeah, I took it full
Yeah.
on, man.
Yeah. That history is so important. I didn't even know that particular, but I realized, well, any interpretation, again, you're going to be dealing with some historicity of some things happening. Just reading the letters to like Corinth, right? You realize that this back and forth existed where they're battling out these weird little impulses, like the Gnostic impulse to go, well, we'll keep the church and everything, but we're gonna do a new custom. It's like getting custom Nikes. Like I'll keep the Jordans, but then I want to wrap it with something.
It's our
And
Nikes.
yeah, it's
That's right.
ours, Nike. Yeah, and this whole like individualist customization, conveyor belt style theology. It's in people to go there. That's
Yeah.
like they're falling because I'm the God. I'm going to be the God. Why can they do it? Why do I have to kiss the priest? Why do they wear a funny hat? Like, why is it funny hats? Why isn't it just normal? Why do they have to
Yeah.
be like all these like incredulity, right? All these this incredulous position about what all you're really saying is, if I made a church, it would be this way. And it's
That's
like,
right.
there you go. If you have it,
That's what-
why don't you have a church? Then they go, well, I don't know. I have to admit, I don't know. And okay, welcome back to humility. So if you're going to pursue this, there's no way around there's no way around that you're going to need an end to a foundation, and the foundation's going to have hierarchy systems, and the foundation's going to have a history, and the foundation's going to have a story to it. So the rejection of tradition is the beginning of a tradition that's just not another
I
tradition.
know, that's
So
wild. But when Americans learn that, it's fat.
I think they're
Listen,
learning it.
come to Greenville, South Carolina. Come to our restaurant. It's called Capey. You get these emails. This is you. You'll check this email, right? This Jim
Yeah.
Bob. I'll
Yep.
send you a couple cool links about
Okay.
our restaurant. It's just we're trying to put together this relationship between human beings again, and so we're trying there. But
Nice.
I love that you gave me this much time, man. And so
Yeah, no problem.
we'll check in and consider me a friend if you ever come to the American South, or I'm going to the Georgian Republic tomorrow. So if you ever want
Whoa.
to take a trip, I don't know, you and your wife or whatever, your
Mhm.
family, and you just are like, I want to go do something cool, come to where we work and I can hook you up, bring a couple
Cool.
friends and all that. I don't know. There's a million things.
Awesome.
But
Yeah,
I'll be
just
in
keep
touch.
me informed, and and if you ever want to just say hi in the stream, you can hang in the chat or jump on or whatever. But they're always really fun, exciting, multi-topic streams that go in all directions.
I'm
So,
gonna Jim Bob, I'm gonna make it a point to come on and see more.
Cool.
I watched a little bit, but let me get
Cool.
in there.
all right,
Thank
cool.
you, man.
Hey, no problem. Thanks a lot.
All right, peace to you. Have a
God
great
bless.
day.
Bye. You too.